First one is the title story, and it starts like this. I run a small metalworking business out of my property. The shop sits behind my house, down a wide gravel drive that I laid myself over geotextile and crushed stone. The workshop is a steel building with a roll-up door, a concrete slab, a welding booth with a curtain, and a corner with racks for steel stock. I have a forklift that I maintain like it's my truck, and I keep the area clear because deliveries need to get in and out. I've got no trespassing in private drive, no parking signs posted at the entrance and by the shop door. The signs are not small. They are white aluminum with black lettering, standard reflective type. One even has the code section printed under it, because I got tired of arguments. I'm not part of any HOA. My deed says I'm outside the platted subdivision by one parcel. Their neighborhood starts one street over. Over the last couple of years, I've had people from that area try to tell me what to do. One person told me my shop should be earth tone so it would blend. Another person said my forklift looked industrial and scared their kid. Someone else once put a note on my mailbox saying I should move my work truck by 7 p.m. to respect quiet hours. I tossed the notes. I keep my place tidy, I don't make noise at odd hours, and I don't blast music. I do real work and go to bed early. I thought people would just accept that. The day this all happened, I had a pickup scheduled for a set of gates and railings. The set was for a contractor who had a deadline on a house he was finishing. The gates were a matched pair, powder-coated, with custom scrolls I cut on the plasma table. I had everything staged near the door so we could forklift straight onto a flatbed. I had straps ready, edge protectors ready, the bill of lading printed, and a copy of the weight calculations in case the driver asked. I had told them 10 a.m., because I like to avoid school traffic and the morning rush. Around 8:30 a.m., I walked outside with my coffee to open the shop and do a last check. I made it halfway down the drive and just stopped. The entire access to my shop was blocked with cars. Not 2 or 3. 6. They were nose to tail across the loading area and in a row along the gravel so that nothing could enter or exit. One was backed almost against my roll-up door. If I'd raised that door, it would have kissed the license plate. 2 were parked so tight they were nearly kissing each other. All of them looked like they belonged to that HOA area. Stickers, decals, and the usual community event magnets on one. I set my cup on the fender of my truck, took photos from 4 angles, and then took a quick video walking the driveway, saying the date and time out loud. I pulled up the camera app's timestamp to be safe. I walked to the nearest house belonging to that subdivision on the corner and knocked. The door opened a few inches with a chain on it. The person behind it said, "We're doing an HOA cookout at the Greenway. Parking is full. We're using your lot for overflow." I said, "This is not a lot. This is my shop driveway. I have a commercial pickup at 10. Move the cars." The door opened wider. The person shrugged and said, "We can't. The food truck is already here and we told everyone to park here. It's just for a few hours. You can work later." I said, "No. I run a business. I'm not in your HOA. Your cars need to move now." I got the classic line, "Call the HOA." They approved it. I pointed at the sign that says private drive, no parking, tow-away zone. The person didn't care. They said, "You're being difficult for no reason," and closed the door. I called the HOA office number I had saved from a previous nonsense mailer they sent me about neighborhood standards. A woman answered with the kind of tone that tells you everything. I identified myself, gave my address, and explained that my driveway was blocked by cars from their event. I said I run a business and I had a scheduled pickup at 10 a.m., and I needed the cars moved immediately. She said, "That space looked available and it's part of our neighborhood." I said, "It is not part of your neighborhood. Check your map. I'm outside your plat. This is private property and an operating workshop. Move the cars." She said, "We will not be moving vehicles during the event. It will be finished by 2. If you interfere with our members, we will call the police and report harassment and attempted theft." I said, "You have 15 minutes. After that I'm calling a tow company, and I will request trespass enforcement." She said, "Good luck," and hung up. I recorded that call on speaker with another phone. I'm not dumb. One of the first things I learned running a business is to document everything. I wrote down the time, the number, and a summary while it was fresh. Then I called the towing company I use for heavy moves when my truck is down. They also do private property impounds. I have their contract and a posted sign with their company name and number on it, because that's required in a lot of places if you want to tow from private property without waiting on a patrol unit. I called the dispatcher and said I had 6 vehicles blocking my workshop drive. No permission given, signs posted, property owner present to sign. He said, "We can send 3 trucks now and 2 more in 30 minutes. I said that was fine and asked him to note that I would be on site to sign each authorization and that I had photos. At 9:02 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was the flatbed driver. He said he was 10 miles away and asked if I could be ready early. I told him to sit tight because the driveway was blocked by an HOA event. He left, then stopped laughing when he realized I wasn't joking. I told him to wait at the gas station on the highway. I texted him a pin and said I'd call when it was clear. I hate telling someone to wait. Time is money in this line of work. I don't get paid until it's loaded and gone. By 9:15 a.m., the first tow truck rolled up. The driver stepped out, looked at the cars, looked at my signs, and said, "We're good to go if you're authorizing." I handed him my ID and pointed at the sign again. He took photos of the sign and the cars from multiple angles, like they always do, and handed me a tablet to sign the private property tow form. It had a checkbox for owner/agent present, no permission given, obstructing driveway, and warning posted. I checked all of them. Then I stood back. He backed up to the car closest to my roll-up, slid the wheel lift under, raised it, and started securing. Another truck arrived and did the same to the car that was cocked across my turning area. Right on cue, I heard 2 sirens far off. I wasn't surprised. When people do something wrong and get caught, they think the police are a magic reset button. A minute later, 2 cruisers pulled in fast enough to kick dust. Before the officers even stepped out, a man in a golf shirt marched up behind them like he was in charge. He pointed at me and yelled, "That's him. He's stealing our vehicles." He threatened us. One officer told him to stand back. The other walked over to me and asked what was going on. I said, "Good morning, officer. This is my property. I run a licensed metalworking business here. Vehicles from the HOA parked without permission all over my driveway. I have posted tow away signs and no trespassing signs. I have a scheduled pickup at 10. I called the HOA and told them to move the vehicles. They refused. I called a tow company, and I'm signing the authorizations. I have photos and a call recording with the HOA office." The officer asked for ID. I handed over my license and the folder I keep in the shop with copies of my property plat, my business license, and the county registration for the workshop building. He looked through everything. He asked if the towing company had a contract posted. I pointed to the sign with the tow company's name and number and the code section. He took photos of the sign. He asked if I wanted to pursue trespass charges. I said, yes, for every vehicle owner who refuses to leave and for whoever organized this. The officer walked over to the man in the golf shirt, who had already started a speech about community needs and spirit of cooperation. The officer asked him if he was the one who authorized parking here. The man said, "We're the HOA. We approved the Greenway event. The neighborhood lacks parking. This area is under our community standards. He needs to be a team player." The officer looked at him like he'd heard that line before. He asked, "Do you have written permission from the property owner to park here?" The man said, "We don't need permission. It's right here. It's open. And we pay dues for common areas." The officer pointed at the sign and said, "This is not a common area. This is private property. You are trespassing." By now, a crowd had started along the sidewalk leading to the HOA's Greenway. A couple of people shouted that I was being selfish. Someone yelled that they were going to leave a bad review for my business. Another person said they had a baby sleeping in the car and couldn't move it yet. I said, "Move the car and go home. Don't park here again." I wasn't gentle about it. You stop being gentle when people block your income. The towing crews kept working. They were calm and professional. One driver asked me to point out the property line between my gravel and the HOA's grass, so he could place the dollies without crossing it. I appreciated that. I walked it with him and showed the survey stakes and the mark in the gravel where my fence used to run, before I opened the drive wider. I had the survey pinned in the folder, and I showed him the distance from the corner marker to the drive edge. He nodded and stayed on my side. The officer returned and asked for a quick written statement. I said I'd provide one and asked if I could include copies of the photos and the call recording. He said yes and gave me a case number. I wrote out a short, factual statement on a clipboard, signed it, and handed it over. The second officer walked down the line of cars and started running plates to locate owners. He told the crowd that anyone who moved their car immediately would be given a trespass warning and let go. But once a hook was on, it was gone. Some people peeled off and moved. Others decided to argue right up until their car popped onto a wheel lift, and then they begged. It didn't matter. The drivers weren't rude, but they didn't stop mid-lift. They finished the securement, built the invoices, handed out the little carbon copies with the yard address, and rolled out. The man in the golf shirt tried to stand in front of one truck and block it. The officer told him to step aside. He argued. The officer warned him again. He stepped aside when the driver started inching forward. The crowd got quieter after that. Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing with updates from the flatbed driver. He said he had another pickup later and asked if I could guarantee a time. I told him I couldn't guarantee anything until the last car was out. I told him I'd call the minute the drive was clear. He said he'd give me until 11 a.m. Then he'd have to move on. I looked at the line of cars still in the way and felt my stomach tighten. If I missed this pickup, I'd have to deliver myself, and that would eat a day. The contractor had a deadline and a crew waiting on the railings. This wasn't a hobby. This was money. At 10:07 a.m., the last tow truck hooked the last car. a crossover with a child seat in the back and a community sticker on the window. The driver did one extra loop of the strap for the hatch because the latch looked soft. He never said anything rude. He just did his job. The officer handed me a copy of the incident number and told me to email the photos and the recording to the record's address he wrote on the back. He said if I wanted to sign trespass notices, I could do that when owners were identified. I said yes. He told the crowd the driveway was closed and people needed to leave. The man in the golf shirt shouted that this wasn't over. The officer told him to move along. I called the flatbed driver and told him the driveway was clear. He said he could be there in 15. I rolled up the shop door, pulled the forklift forward, and checked the gates again for rub marks. I set foam edge protectors on the spots I knew the straps would sit. I double-checked the powder coat and taped the latch points to prevent chips. When the flatbed backed in, I felt like I could breathe again. We loaded, strapped, checked, signed, and the truck pulled out at 10:28 a.m. I sent the contractor a message that the load was on the way. He sent a thumbs up and a thanks. That was the first normal thing all morning. After the truck left, I sat at my desk in the corner of the shop and started turning the mess into paperwork. I wrote an email to the police records address with the case number in the subject. I attached 21 photos and a short video. I attached the audio of the call with the HOA office. I typed out a clean incident statement. I saved a copy to a folder with the date. I then wrote a simple invoice to myself listing business interruption, delay of scheduled pickup due to trespass/obstruction, calculated the extra 30 minutes of the flatbed standby rate, and noted it as a potential claim. I wasn't even sure I'd pursue it, but I like to have a number. Around noon, I heard footsteps at the edge of the shop. I looked up and saw the man in the golf shirt again, this time with 2 other people and a phone pointed at me like he was filming. He started in before I could say anything. He said I would be paying for everyone's tow. He said I had stolen 6 vehicles. He said the HOA would file a civil complaint for harassment and damages. He said I had ruined a community event. I stood up and said, "Leave my property now. This is your trespass warning. If you don't, I will call the police again and sign it." He said, "You won't do anything." I walked to the edge of the shop where the gravel meets the slab and pointed at the sign again. I said, "You are trespassing. You are not welcome here. Leave now." He backed up, still filming, and said, "You'll be hearing from our attorney." I said, "Send it certified." He left. 2 days later, I got a letter. It wasn't from an attorney. It was on HOA letterhead with a logo and a slogan about community pride. It demanded reimbursement for unlawful towing, emotional distress, and disruption of a scheduled event. It cited no statute. It threatened that if I didn't pay within 10 days, they would pursue all legal remedies. It also said I must cease and desist from interfering with future HOA events. I laughed when I read that line. I scanned the letter and forwarded it to the attorney who helped me set up my business LLC and who I call when I need a clean, boring letter with actual law in it. He called me back that afternoon. He asked me to run through what happened. I told him everything, including the call recording. He said, "We'll respond." He asked me to drop by his office with copies of the photos and the incident number. I did. He drafted a letter that didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a door closing. It cited the state trespass statute, the private property towing statute, and the civil code section for tortious interference with business. It laid out the facts in bullet points. I'm not part of their HOA. I have posted signs with a tow company and code citations. I warned them. They refused. Police responded. Incident number. Vehicles were towed by a licensed operator. Owners were provided invoices and information. It said I would not be paying their invoices, and any further contact like that would be treated as harassment. It also said that if they continued to interfere with my business, we would seek damages. We sent it certified mail with return receipt. A week later, the green card came back with a sloppy signature and the date. Then things got quiet. For a few weeks, nobody from the HOA parked near my drive. The greenway got a bunch of cones and handwritten no parking signs that didn't look official. I minded my business and got back to work. About a month later, I got a packet in the mail from the small claims court. The HOA had filed a claim against me for unlawful towing and damages to community event. The amount was just under the cap for small claims. The attachments were printed photos of cars on tow trucks, screenshots of social media comments, and a copy of that same letter they sent me the first week. There was no police report included. They had written that I began towing vehicles without warning and that I physically threatened members. That last part made me mad, but I didn't show it. I called my attorney and asked if he handled small claims. He said I could represent myself and he'd help me prepare. He said he'd come if I insisted, but it wasn't required and would cost more than the claim. I said I'd handle it. We put together a packet that looked a lot different from theirs. It had a cover with the case number and defendant's exhibit list. Exhibit A was the deed and plat showing I am not part of the HOA's subdivision and showing my parcel lines. Exhibit B was a photo of my posted signs with timestamps. Exhibit C was the private property tow contract and a copy of the sign wording that matched the statute. Exhibit D was the police incident number with a printout from the records unit confirming the call and responding officers. Exhibit E was my photos and video of the cars blocking the driveway with timestamps. Exhibit F was a transcript of the call with the HOA office where they refused to move vehicles and threatened to call the police if I interfered. Exhibit G was an email from the flatbed company noting arrival delay and standby time. Exhibit H was a simple written timeline. I also printed the relevant statute pages and highlighted the parts that matter. I put sticky tabs on everything so the judge could flip fast. The hearing day came. I wore clean work clothes and brought my folder. The HOA sent the man in the golf shirt and another person who called themselves a board member. They had a stack of loose pages and a binder with their logo on the front. When the judge called the case, the man in the golf shirt launched into a speech about community, tradition, and neighborliness. The judge cut him off and said, "State the legal basis for your claim." The man said I towed without warning and caused emotional distress. The judge asked, "Is this defendant a member of your homeowners association?" The man said, "He is adjacent to our community, and we enforce standards for the broader neighborhood." The judge raised an eyebrow and asked, "Is he subject to your covenants?" The man said, "He should be." The judge said, "That's not how this works." The judge turned to me and asked me to respond. I said, "Your Honor, I run a licensed metalworking business on my property. I am not a member of their HOA. On the date in question, several vehicles blocked my workshop driveway. I have posted no parking and tow-away signs that meet the statute. I warned their office and gave them time to move. They refused and threatened to call the police if I interfered. I called a licensed tow company and signed authorizations. Police arrived, confirmed it was private property, and gave me a case number. The vehicles were towed. I have photos, timestamps, and the recording. I handed up the packet. The judge flipped through it quietly. He asked me to point to the statute on towing. I did. He read the highlighted part and nodded. The man in the golf shirt tried again. He said I ambushed families. He said a child was napping. He said I could have been a good neighbor. The judge asked, "Did you have permission to park there?" He said, "We don't need permission." The judge asked, "Do you have any evidence that this is part of your association's common area?" He said, "It looks like it is." The judge shook his head. He turned back to my packet and looked at the transcript of the call. He read the line where the HOA office said they would not move vehicles and would call the police if I interfered. He looked up and asked the man, "Is this your office?" The man said yes. The judge asked, "Did you refuse to move the vehicles?" The man said, "We couldn't move them during the event." The judge said, "The defendant followed the statutorily required process for private property towing. He has posted signage with the tow operator and code citations. He warned your office. You refused. Police responded and did not stop the towing. Your claim of unlawful towing fails." He then looked at me and asked if I was seeking any counterclaim. I hadn't filed one. I said, "No counterclaim at this time, Your Honor. I just want to be left alone to run my business." The judge wrote for a moment and said, "Plaintiff's claim is dismissed with prejudice. Cost to the defendant." He stamped the paper and handed it to the clerk. The man in the golf shirt said something under his breath about favoritism. The judge said, "One more word and I'll hold you in contempt." The man shut his mouth. I took my copy of the judgment and put it with my records. Outside the courtroom, the other board member tried to talk to me like we could work something out. I said, "There's nothing to work out. Stay off my property." They walked away. After that, things changed. The HOA stopped sending me mailers. Their event flyers no longer used the phrase neighborhood-wide. The Greenway got more signs that said parking for HOA members only, and they hired a traffic control company for their larger events. Sometimes I still get side-eye when I drive past, but nobody parks in my drive anymore. The no trespassing sign doesn't even get stickers slapped on it like it used to. A couple months later, one of the people whose car got towed showed up at my shop alone. They kept their distance and said they were there to apologize. They said they didn't know my shop was an actual business and thought it was just a big garage. They said the HOA told them it was fine to park there. They said they paid the tow and it hurt. I told them I appreciated the apology. I said I am not trying to be anyone's enemy, but I have to keep the driveway open. They nodded. They bought a small fire pit ring I had made and left with it in the back of their SUV. That was the only conversation from that whole mess that felt normal. The best part came in the mail about a month after the small claims hearing. The police records unit sent me a packet with trespass warnings issued to 4 of the vehicle owners and a note that the HOA office had been advised on the boundaries of their authority. It wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork, but it was satisfying. It meant I wouldn't have to argue the same thing from zero next time. If someone parked again, I could reference an existing warning. I also made a couple of small changes on my end. I added another sign at the very entrance where the gravel meets the road. It says private drive, no turnaround, no parking, tow away, tow company number, code. I added a chain across the drive on weekends when I'm not expecting deliveries. It's not heavy. It's just enough to make someone think twice before swinging in. I also moved my mailbox to the other side of the driveway and installed a locking box because during the mess someone had slid a note into it with a threat about ruining my online reviews. I printed that and stuck it in the incident folder too, just in case. People ask me why I didn't sue the HOA for interference with business. I thought about it. The letter my attorney wrote had that paragraph for a reason. I kept track of the flatbed's extra standby charge and my lost time. I could have filed a counterclaim and small claims for that cost. In the end, I didn't. Part of it was time. I'd rather be welding than sitting in a courtroom. Part of it was strategy. The clean dismissal with prejudice was enough to set a line. If they crossed it again, I could hit harder with a pattern of behavior. Also, it honestly felt good enough to have the judge say what everyone knows but HOAs like to ignore. Their power stops where their plat stops. A few practical details helped me win this without drama, and I stick to them now. I keep my signs up to code with the tow company's name, phone number, and the relevant statute printed at the bottom in small letters. I keep my tow authorization forms blank in a folder so I can sign on the spot. I keep photo documentation of the signs in the driveway at different times of day so nobody can claim they were hidden. I keep a copy of my business license and a printout of the property plat in a plastic sleeve near the shop desk. I also keep a spiral notebook near the door where I can jot down times and actions when something is happening. If you run a business, that notebook is worth more than most people think. When you hand an officer a clean timeline, things go smoother. There were a couple of quiet attempts to poke me after all this. One afternoon I found a chalk line across the entrance to my drive, like someone wanted to mark it as part of a walking route. I pressure washed it off. A week later, a flyer got taped to my shop door inviting me to a neighborhood standards meeting. I took a photo and threw it away. Nothing formal came after that. It was all noise. The last time I saw the man in the golf shirt was at the grocery store. He stared at me like I had cost him a fortune. I probably cost him a couple of angry emails and a rubber stamp meeting he didn't get to run. He turned his card and went down the next aisle. I kept buying bolts and batteries and coffee, like a normal person with work to do. If there's any advice in this, it's simple. Know where your property line is. Post clear signs that match your local code. Have a relationship with a legitimate tow operator who knows the rules and documents their work. Keep your paperwork close. Don't argue in the driveway. Either people will respect your boundary or they won't. If they don't, use the tools that exist. Photos, forms, police, court. It's not dramatic like a movie. It's better. It works. The story didn't end with shouting or a viral video. It ended with cars being towed legally, a judge reading a statute out loud, and me loading a flatbed at 10:28 a.m. and getting paid for finished work. The HOA learned that community doesn't mean they get to annex whichever piece of land is convenient for them. They learned that a sign with a code number on it is not a suggestion. And I learned, again, that if you keep your record straight and your temper in check, you can beat nonsense without losing a day more than you have to. Since then, my driveway has been empty when it needs to be empty. Deliveries roll in and out. I don't get mystery notes on my mailbox. When the HOA has an event, I see rented cones and a couple of teenagers in safety vests waving cars toward the far end of the greenway where they actually have space. That's fine with me. Do whatever you want over there. Over here, the forklift needs room to turn. The straps need room to go over the rails, and the work needs to leave on time. That's the whole point. A month after all this, the contractor I built the gates for sent me a photo of them installed. They were straight, clean, and the latch swing was perfect. He said the homeowner loved them. I stared at the photo and thought about that morning with the wall of cars. I thought about the way the man in the golf shirt said, "We're the HOA. We don't need permission." Every time I look at those gates in my portfolio, I remember that line. And I remember the officer pointing at my sign and saying, "This is private property." It's not exciting like a TV show, but it's the kind of sentence that keeps a business alive. And when people ask me what happened to the HOA that parked in my driveway, I tell them the truth. They called the police. I signed tow forms. The cars left on wheel lifts. A judge read the law. Nobody tried it again. That's it. That's the whole story. The good person wins and the bad behavior stops. That's all I wanted in the first place. The next one is petty revenge story. This is a very petty story from years ago, about how I made my Karen of an aunt quite literally flee before me. Backstory. Karen was married to my father's brother. My father's family is very snooty and classist already. We're now happily no contact, and my mom is divorced. Karen was so snooty that my father's family couldn't stand her. No one liked my mom, or me and my brother, because my mom was a good-hearted middle-class woman, or according to them, riffraff. A few months after marrying Karen, my uncle came out as gay. I'm pretty sure he was bi or pan, and she just turned him off women. They stayed married as a marriage of convenience, and each had boyfriends. I don't care. I just find it amusing. I never socialized with her or my uncle, despite them living in the same small town, but I did run into her every while at a store. It was, after all, a small town. So, here's where the story begins. I was 16, and started running into Karen a lot, every some weeks. At first, I thought nothing of it. We wouldn't talk, or really acknowledge each other, so who cares? Then I noticed something. Every time Karen saw me, she'd very slightly stick her nose up at me and turn away. She did this very slightly, so as to not have everyone else notice it. But she did it enough that I noticed it, every single time she did this. Being the petty teenager I was, I decided the best way to beat a bully was to turn it back on her. So every time I saw her, I'd slightly turn my nose up at her. This continued for a couple of years, without me really thinking anything of it. Then one day I found out just how much I was getting under this grown woman's skin. I was in a small store with a glass window in the door. As I left the store, I passed Karen as she entered. Once again I turned my nose up at her, thinking nothing of it. Right outside the store was my mom, waiting for me, in our car. As I got in, she let me know what she had seen. Your Aunt Karen just did the weirdest thing. She was walking towards the store, when suddenly, without breaking stride, she turned on her heel and quickly started walking in the opposite direction. After a couple of paces, she kind of shook herself, turned back around, and then went into the store. That was when I realized that she had seen me in the window, and automatically, without thinking about it, spun around and tried to flee. All because she was afraid of a teenage girl turning her nose up at her. After a moment, she finally realized that she was running away from a teenage girl, realized how utterly pathetic she was being, and had to steel herself to face my horrific insult as she turned back around to face her nemesis. Once I told my mom what had been going on for the last couple of years, she thought it was hilarious. And while I eventually moved away and never saw Karen again, every time after that wonderful little day, when I did see Karen, I always made sure to slightly turn my nose up at her. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow at Story Slices.